Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's Elephant Professional Lecture from here in the Golden Triangle Asian Elephant Foundation. Having been all arty last week and talking about photography and how to make yourself and elephants look beautiful with James de la Cloche, we're going back to the science, where a renowned, possibly, you can't be the hardest working elephant scientist in India, but you are very prolific in your papers. Talking about endocrinology and working with wild elephants, it's Sanjita Sharma Pokharel. She's also an artist and a poetess, or a poet, but you say poetess anyway, so we can. A woman of many talents, but here to talk mainly about the science and human-elephant conflict in India and Nepal. I will hand you over to Sanjita. So Sanjita, please do speak away and let us know all about it.
Thank you so much. So I would like to share the screen. Just bear with me for some time. Yes, so this is, so before I start the presentation, I would like to thank Joan and the team for giving this wonderful opportunity for me to come here and talk about elephants. And I'm assuming that most of the audiences who are live on Facebook, they are aware about elephants. So the presentation main theme will be cortisol and how research related to cortisol can be translated to conservation. So with this theme, I'd like to start the presentation or the talk today. And before I start, I would like to carry you all very, very far away on the time scale. That is 4 million years ago to African basin. And I would like to present you one of my favorite picture by paleo artist Julius. In this picture, you can see this is one of the glimpse of evening. This imaginative, of course. You can see the old ancestor of Proboscideans, Ananicus. We can see Dinotherium. You can see Loxodonta odorata, which is extinct cousin of the modern African elephants, and of course the closely related and little smaller size Loxodonta exoptata. So the main purpose of me to show you this picture is quite obvious because I want to highlight one of the research that came out recently and which talk about the extinction of these Proboscideans. And I'm pretty sure that you guys will not be surprised to know that the main reason or the main rate of the extinction started between 2 million years ago to 75,000 years ago. And the main reason behind the extinction was found to be the global climate extremities or global climate change. So sadly to say, I'm really sad to present this fact that because of this climate change and other factors, we have only 3 living species of elephants or Proboscideans left with us out of 185 recorded or documented elephants. So if you come back to the current scenario and see that what is happening in the present context, we do know that there are only 3 species of elephants and the situation is not quite different than what was that before 4 million years ago or 2 million years ago. The situation is that we still have climate extremities, but it's just that the rate of the climate extremities is quite high. And we have habitat loss again, but habitat loss again is quite accelerated as compared to before. And on the top of it, what we have and what we need to worry about is there is escalating rate of human-induced activities. So if you see the synergistic effect of all these factors are actually, changing the dynamics of the current living elephants, and thus the resulting factor, consequently, what we are offered as is there is rapid declining habitat of these elephants. If you see Asian elephants, in the context of Asian elephants, they have lost almost 6% of their historical range, which is, in this picture, if you can see that there is the gray area, which was the historical distribution of elephants, and these red dots are the present context where present habitat where elephants are found. So if you see such kind of rapid, loss of the habitat, that elephants are confined to the pockets of habitat, this is where there is a need of conservation. So when we talk about conservation, I get reminded of my graduate when I was a student, when people used to ask me that what you want to be or what you want to work for. So at that time, I used to say that I want to work for wildlife conservation. I think now that I am very naive. I was very naive at that period, that I little did I know that, the wildlife itself it represents the vast spectra of animal, and the conservation. Now, if you ask me what is conservation, I feel that conservation is the complex conundrum to solve. It's very complex because there are multifaceted factors that one needs to consider when we talk about conservation of any species. So what will be the main motto if we talk about elephant conservation? What will be the main motto behind the conservation? So if I have to list as a biologist, I say that the main aim will be to maintain the genetic diversity and also the viable population in a suitable habitat. So to attain such aim or to attain such goal, the steps, if I have to give you these steps of conservation, I will say that we need to understand elephants. When I say understanding elephants, it is not just understanding elephants, it is understanding the holistic approach of understanding the elephants, which include to understand their behavior, their physiology, their population dynamics, their social dynamics, and also about the habitat suitability. So not just in a natural condition, but also in the condition where there is changed ecosystem. So, and now, as I said earlier, that we have the human aspect. So when we talk about elephant conservation, it is important to understand the elephant-human dynamics. So we have to understand the entire behavior, physiology, and population dynamics. In addition, we need to know the dynamics between elephant and human. So once we get these holistic insights, these insights then can be translated to conservation policies and strategies. Now I know I'm hoping that most of the audiences understood that how complex is elephant conservation. It is not as easy as it is said. So, and also now let us focus on Asian elephants, because I mostly work on Asian elephants. My presentation or my talk will have Asian elephants is the main theme for it. In case of Asian elephants, if you see the research trend, what has been documented or what has been reported so far, most of the studies talk about elephant behavior and cognition. They talk about population, social dynamics. They talk about habitat preferences and suitability. And on the top of it, most of the research focus on elephant-human adverse interaction, which is also popularly known as elephant-human conflict. I'm avoiding the use of the word conflict here, and wherever necessary hereby in my presentation, I'll be referring elephant-human conflict as elephant-human adverse interactions. So here you can see that I'm not demeaning that these studies are not required. These are the vital study that is important for understanding or conserving the elephants. What is the missing link that you feel? The missing link, if you see, is the physiological understanding. So we are just ignoring the fact that how elephants are responding from within when they are facing such kind of change in environment. So if you see the research trend so far, based on the stress physiology of elephants, there are very limited study. There are all about 53 research that has been documented so far, including entire quartile ranking, quartile 1 to quartile 4. There are only 53 research that focus on stress response. And so this reflects that there is clear paucity of scientific information on stress physiology of elephants or Asian elephants in that case. In addition, if you see the news related to elephant-human adverse interaction, and I'm now talking about the India, you can see that there are multiple news articles that circulates in Indian news media about elephant killing human being, elephant attacking human being, elephant coming out of their habitats, and in retaliation or in return, elephant being killed in railway collision, elephant being killed in electrocutions, and elephant being killed in retaliatory responses. So the reason behind this is quite obvious. So let me take you all to India. So in India, there are around 27,000 to 30,000 elephants. That is around 50 to 60% of global Asian elephant population. And the protected areas in India forms only 22% of elephant habitat. That means the rest of the elephants are actually living in a fragmented pockets of forest, or they're living in a human production habitat, or they're living in areas like reserve forest. So in this situation, what happens is there is sharing of resources between two potent species, the humans and the elephants, right? So when there's sharing of resources and space between two potent species, obviously there will be rise in adverse human-elephant interaction, which is elephant-human conflict. So if you see the statistic, in every year in India, there are almost around 100 elephants and almost around 500 humans that lost battle between this tug of war of resources and space. So based on the scanty information on stress physiology and also the motivation behind, all this kind of adverse interaction, I was curious to know that how the health of the elephants get affected, and in long run, the survival of the elephant get affected in such kind of interactions. So this is where I thought of studying the stress physiology in elephants. So what exactly it is stress physiology? So as all of us know that ecosystem is a complex tapestry, right? There are lots of interaction happening between organism and organism, within organism, and between organism and environment. Sometimes this kind of interactions or perturbation or challenges could act as a disturbance, could act as a stresses, hampering the homeostasis or body balancing mechanism in animal. In such situation, body tends to react to such kind of challenges or responses. This reaction or coping mechanism is known as stress response. So if you see, so if in a normal term, it's just a reaction that maintains the homeostasis in an organism. So the stress response can be physiological, it can be psychological, it can be social and behavioral. But in my context or in my study, I'm more interested to understand the physiological manifestation of stress response, and particularly on wild Asian elephants. So since I said that I'm interested to understand the physiological pathway of stress response, so how exactly, it is divided? Like I said earlier, there are multiple perturbations or disturbances present in the environment, and that is what is perceived by animal or individual. And depending upon individual quality or personality trait, the animal reacts to such kind of stimulus. And if you see that, if you narrow down your camera or zoom down the lens, you can see that, there are organ level changes that occurs, that there finally some chemicals get secreted out, and these chemicals travel all the way to target cell to produce changes, and this is reflected in their behavior and of course on their health. So if you see the physiological pathway of stress response, there are two pathways. One is neuroendocrine axis, and the hero for this, the actor for this is catecholamines. And another axis is a hypothalamus pituitary adenocortical axis. And again, the hero for us in this battle or this war is cortisol. So since, as I said, that I'm more interested to understand the hypothalamo-pituitary adenocortical axis, which is also in CERT known as HPA axis, I'll be focusing on this pathway. So if you see the physiological pathway of the stress response, it is nothing but it's hyperactivation of HPA axis. So what exactly happens? So let us take the example of Bunte. So Bunte is a cartoon character of Asian elephants that I created. So if imagine that Bunte experienced lots of disturbances in the environment. These disturbances are perceived by the brain of Bunte, and which is also called as stressors. So this disturbances or perturbation or challenges is perceived by the brain of elephants. So if you narrow down inside the brain of elephants, you can see that there is an organ or there is a gland called hypothalamus. So hypothalamus immediately receives these signals and secretes something called corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH. This CRH, what it does, it travels from hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary gland, and in the anterior pituitary gland, once it receives the signal from CRH, it releases ACTH. So what ACTH or adenocorticotropic hormone does is it travels all the way down to the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is located on the top of the kidney. And if you see, or if you zoom inside the adrenal gland, there are cortex and medulla. So the cortex, and also to be specific, zona fasciculata of cortex then release our hero called cortisol. So cortisols are, popularly, they are known as stress hormones. And I want to talk more about that in coming up slides. So what happens once it comes out in the blood streams, when it gets secreted in the blood streams, the cortisol has negative feedback on the ACTH and the CRH, and thus this axis get disrupted, or it gets, so that there is a negative feedback loop and it stops. This is how cycles exist. This is how animal perceive threats. They release cortisol and the cycle stops. This cortisol will then helps in multiple, it has multiple function, which I'll be discussing about. And here I have also presented fecal glucocorticoid metabolites. So the cortisol, once gets secreted in the blood, it travels all the way down to alimentary canal, where it goes undergoes various kind of mechanism like metabolism, deconjugation, conjugation, and further deconjugation, and finally get excreted out as a fecal glucocorticoid metabolite, which I'll be referring as FGCM in my in my talks. So as I said earlier, that glucocorticoid is popularly, most of the scientists prefer to call glucocorticoids as stress hormone. But I also want to, make it clear that glucocorticoids are not just a stress hormone, they are a metabolic hormones. If you see the nomenclature of glucocorticoids, it is actually with the term glucose, cortex, and steroid. Glucose because it helps in glucose metabolism, and cortex because it is secreted by the cortex region of adrenal gland, and of course it is a steroid. So once we combine all these three terms, it gives rise to glucocorticoids. So cortisol is one of the glucocorticoids that gets secreted in with multiple function to be performed inside the body. The functions, if you see the function of the glucocorticoids, it ranges from cardiovascular function, maintaining the cardiovascular system or homeostasis, to immune system, to metabolic system, to glucose transport, development, cognition. So you can see there are multiple function of the glucocorticoids, but generally, we researchers generally tend to take that liberty to call glucocorticoid as a stress hormone. But one of the function of glucocorticoids among all these is to help in coping mechanism. What it does, it shifts the energy from, it shifts the energy balance to maintain the homeostasis in time of crisis. So that's the reason we use glucocorticoid to measure the stress response. So with this talk, I want to, make sure that most of us should not call glucocorticoids as a stress hormone, but rather we should call it as metabolic hormone that is, that has a co-function, or that is helping or aiding in stress response as well. So with this clarity, let us see what happens if animal or bunte, in that case, get exposed to the stressors. So depending upon the time duration of stress exposure to the stressors, there are two kinds of stress response. So if the elephants or if the animals or organism face a stressor for a short duration, in that stresses is actually adaptive, and it's beneficial for the animal because it helps in fighting or fighting for the fight or flight response for such kind of stressful events. And it is short duration, and it helps animal by giving immediate energy to flee the situation or to cope up with any kind of stressful event. So the shorter the stress exposure to stresses, it is good for the animal. But now if you see what happens if animal face these stressors for a prolonged period. As I said, the SPA axis earlier, if there is prolonged increase in cortisol, then this cycle, that negative feedback loop, stops, and there is deleterious effect on the health of the animal. So the longer you face this stress, it is more dangerous for your health. It will impact your immune system, it will impact your reproduction, it will impact your cognitive abilities, and finally it may also threaten the survival. So now you can make sense that there are two kinds of stress response: acute stress response and a chronic stress response. The acute one is good for, it has more adaptive function, whereas the chronic stress response are more deleterious in nature. So here, as I wrote here, that you can see that stress response have a paradoxical action. They can protect the organism and they can damage the organism depending on how long they face the stresses or perturbations. So as I said earlier, there are multiple factors that influence the stress response, and this research that published so far only mainly focus on captive elephants. There are very few research. There are only 7 research that has been documented so far on the wild elephants. And in my case, I was more interested to understand the stress response in wild condition, because in wild condition we have, if you have to divide the stresses, there is ecological stresses or perturbation, then we have the anthropogenic stresses. So I wanted to see how these two could influence the stress response in elephants. So when I listed the types of stresses that could influence the stress response in elephants, I found that there are many of them. And since depending upon my PhD duration or my postdoctoral duration, so those factors which I felt is feasible to conduct research on, and those factors which I felt is ecologically meaningful, I picked up those stresses and perturbations and went further to understand the proximate causation of stress response. Please make sure that you remember the proximate causation of stress response was what I was interested to understand initially. So where did I study and why did I collected the fecal samples? So here I just want to briefly tell you that there are different matrices to measure cortisols or the stress hormone. One can measure cortisol or stress hormone, which can be measured by using hair samples, which can be measured by using urine, saliva, and blood samples. And there are multiple matrices that people are developing now. But in my case, I was more focused to measure the stress or the cortisol present in the fecal samples, because first of all, I was working on wild elephants. Collecting a blood sample from wild elephants is near to dangerous. And second thing, it involves lots of ethic and getting a permissions. And then I myself was not ready to violate such ethical norms. And third most important thing is there are ways of collecting blood sample where you capture the elephants, and then they are capturing, restraining, and then collecting the blood sample. But one should be careful that this process of capturing elephants itself is stressful, and that could bias our experiment. Thus, what I did was I just focused on collecting the fresh dung sample from the elephants. But I have another story which I'll share you later. When I decided to collect the fecal sample, I thought that, I came up with a good solution. But later on, I realized that collecting a fecal sample is more tedious than collecting a blood sample. So with this, I went ahead and studied the three populations of elephants in India: the southern population, and the central population, and the northeastern population of elephants. And there were multiple different type of questions that I actually try to answer. The proximate causation of stress response, which I'll highlight in the coming up slides. So what exactly I did was, inside the forest, I followed the elephants. I identified each of the individual based on their morphological features, and also assess their age class depending on the soldier heights. And once the elephant defecated and moved away, I collected the fresh fecal samples as early as possible I could do, and stored them in ice box. So in the lab, I brought those samples that I collected, stored it in -20 till I analyzed. Then I did extraction and analysis. So I'm not going into technical details, but whoever is interested to know more about how to measure hormones, you can please contact me. I provided my email ID in the first slide of my presentation. So now let us go to the snapshot of what actually I found using the cortisol as one of the measure of stress response. So first thing first, I was interested to know that how body condition of elephants get influenced by cortisol. So when I went to the forest, I found the elephants which were very thin, that I was ashamed to call them as elephant because their bone were protruding out. And meantime, when I saw that there were elephants as fat as it was really hanging, the fat was hanging from their throat area. So the first thing I did was I built a chart, a body condition score chart for the wild elephants with a score of 1 to 5. So 1 being very thin elephants and the 5 being very fat elephants. So, and when I saw in the season-wise variation, when I saw that, I found that the most of the individuals were towards the body condition score 1 to 2 to 3 during dry season, and 3 to 4 to 5 during wet season. The frequency was like that. I'm not presenting the data right now. Whoever's interested can go through the paper that is already published. So, and also there was with the data, with the long-term monitoring data of elephant population by Dr. Nachiketa, I also measured the body condition score of 9 female over the period of 6 years. And I found that the body condition score was fluctuating over the season. And in particularly for the drought season, drought year, the body condition declined rapidly. So this reflected that the body condition of the elephants are highly dependent on the resources, that it fluctuates when resource fluctuates. So with that, I was curious that what happens to cortisol for the elephants which are extremely thin versus elephants which are extremely fat. And when I measure the body condition score and cortisol, I found interestingly the the cortisol level or the fecal glucocorticoid metabolite level declined as the body condition increased. It was more prominent for the body condition score 1 and 2, that it was the glucocorticoid was quite high for this individual versus 3, 4, and 5, and the pattern was more prominent in case of female than males. So so you guys must be really curious to know that why elephants with poor body condition had higher fecal glucocorticoid metabolites. So in this context, the stressor, the excess glucocorticoid, actually, as I said earlier, it helps in producing or mobilizing the glucose content. So the process of the higher the glucocorticoids, there will be higher gluconeogenic activity. I don't want to confuse you here. You just remember that higher glucocorticoid will act on the adipose tissues, it will act on the muscles to produce more glucose. And that's the reason those individuals which has high glucocorticoids are generally very thin individuals. So this is what was obvious from our data on Asian elephants, wild Asian elephants. Second thing I was interested to understand was lactation's influence of lactation, presence of calf and adult female and also how it is related to cortisol. So when I measure the cortisol for the lactating female, so this study, I mainly I focused on adult female in the wild herds. And I found that the lactating female had higher glucocorticoid as compared to those which were not lactating. And second thing, those in the adult female in a herd where there were more number of calves had higher fecal glucocorticoid metabolite as compared to the adult female in a herd where there were lesser number of calves. And in third case, I found that the adult female in a herd where there were lesser adult females, she had higher level of fecal glucocorticoid metabolite as compared to the herd where there were more adult females. So the stresses, since I'm not elaborating more, the stresses here, the reason behind this is quite obvious. The excess glucocorticoid could be because of nutritional stress the lactating female must be going. And second thing is the lactogenesis itself is stressful. Third thing is the lactating female is accompanied with the calf, so newborn calf, which has a predation threat. So that could again act as extrinsic stresses, and that could be the reason the herd with the female with the more calves had higher fecal glucocorticoid, because she had to become more vigilant and she needed more cooperative defense mechanism. And the female, in the female where there were less adult female, that means she had more social responsibilities. She had to become more vigilant, and moreover, and also the more adult female in the herd, that means it will be more cooperative mechanism, support mechanism for that female. So it will reduce the stress response. So this was one of the insight, and this is also published. Whoever's interested to know more can go through and can contact me if you have any doubts. So the third thing this was the main thing that I was very interested to understand, that what would happen to the cortisol if the elephants are crop foraging versus those elephants which are not crop foraging. So the basic design for this was, what I did was I studied the elephants in the protected areas, and I made sure these elephants are not the one which were foraging on crops, and they were only foraging on the wild forest. And I studied the elephants in highly fragmented area, human dominated habitat, which is called as Hassan, and it is in Karnataka state of India. And I studied these two populations. I compared the stress response. If you see the Hassan, it forms a perfect ideal study site because it's a mosaic of forested patch and agricultural land. And in this picture, you can see, there is a fringe of forest here, the pockets of forest here, and such pockets of forest are distributed all around. And we have immediately there is no fences, immediately we have crop fields. And this is where there is high chances of elephant getting enticed to forest the crops. And during my study period, which was around 2015, there were almost 33 human deaths till that period, till 2015 period. And there were more number of injuries that were recorded because of elephants. and there are more number of crop foraging incidences that were recorded. And interestingly, I also found that the most of the elephants in this landscape, almost 92.8% of the animal that I sample had a crops remain in their fecal. You can see the coffee beans here, you can see jackfruits, you can see finger millet and the paddy. So it clearly indicated that the most of the elephants were actually foraging on crops. So the basic hypothesis here was to know. So obviously, if I ask any of you, that you guys will say that elephants which were foraging on crops will have higher stress level because they are prone to more human-induced disturbances or perturbation, right? So that was the basic hypothesis that I also said further to further my research. And what I did was, as I said earlier, I compared the fecal glucocorticoid metabolite level for the elephants which were foraging on crops versus, and which were not foraging on crop versus those which were foraging on crops. And interestingly, I found that the elephants which were not foraging on crops had higher fecal glucocorticoid metabolite levels. I was startled, and that was where I could have stopped my research there, and then I could have just speculated something. I would have written some assumption and would have completed this research. But I was further curious to know that why such trend is there. So I revisited the concept. The concept is crop foraging. What is crop foraging or crop raiding? So crop foraging or crop raiding for most of the animals is considered as high risk, high gain strategy, right? So till now, I was just focusing on the high risk part. What I was doing was I was completely ignoring the high gain strategy. So to understand the high gain strategy, what I did was I went further to study the quality of habitat. For this, I used remotely sensed data, NDVI. So what NDVI does is, it is nothing but it's a greenness index. The more greener the area, the more will be the NDVI. So now one should, I'm pretty sure whoever is listening to me will be curious to know that green area doesn't necessarily mean that there will be palatable diet for elephants, right? It can be green for any crops or any plants which elephants are not interested at all. So rather than just relying on habitat quality, what I did was I also measured the fecal nitrogen content of the from the elephant dung sample. What fecal nitrogen content is, it's a proxy or it's a surrogate of protein present in the diet of elephants. So now I have two measures, NDVI as a habitat quality, and then I have fecal nitrogen content to cross-validate the information that I got from NDVI. So when I went further and measured this between crop foraging elephants and non-crop foraging elephants, interestingly, I found that the NDVI, the greenness, and the fecal nitrogen, the protein content was higher for the elephants which were foraging on crops. So it is quite interesting, right? It was the high gain that was actually helping. I'm just saying that it is a probable reason that the high gain was reducing the stress, if I can call it stress, it was reducing the cortisol content in the elephants which were foraging on crops. So this was one of the important insights that I got from my study. So coming to the current study, I'm trying to understand now, since in this study, I mostly focused on crop foraging and cortisol. I did not look into the human aspect of it. I did not assess the human disturbances. So now what I'm doing is I'm measuring the human disturbances, the gradient of human disturbances, and measuring the cortisol content. So this, I have found some interesting insight. I found that the elephants which were in low disturbance area versus moderate versus high disturbance area, with the increase in disturbances, the glucocorticoid is also increasing. This is unpublished data. I'm also looking into different metabolites, different markers here. So once I get the holistic insight, I'll publish it and it will be ready for you all to read about. So this is what I have done so far to understand the proximate causation of stress response in elephants. So if you see that what exactly is the insight, I found that reproductive state, the presence of humans, seasonality and body condition, habitat quality, diet, and social structure is actually influencing the physiological state of elephants. But is this enough? If you just question this, I know if you ask me that, oh, I won't say that I have understood many things about elephants' physiology. For me, it is just a drop in the ocean, the vast ocean of elephant physiology. I'm just removing thread after thread from the complex tapestry. So it is just one thread I have removed. We need to understand many, many things about elephant physiology and what are the factors that could govern. So as I said earlier, and have been emphasizing that I focused only on proximate understanding, and I found that there may be, there may be the physiological adjustment to the changing scenario. And now my long-term goal is to understand the ultimate causation, that what would happen if they are doing physiological adjustment, if elephants are trying to adjust to changing environment, how that will influence their fitness and survival. So that is the ultimate cause that I want to look for. Other than this, I just want to divert little here and want to say that, I also try to understand the stressful past of the elephants. It was just a trial study that I did with Kyoto University using the tail here. As I said, if you remember the stress response axis, that, as the cortisol gets secreted, it also gets embedded in the hair of the elephants. The hair which is near to the skin, the new hair will have the newer information, and the hair which are the distal end will have the information from the past. So my main question here was to understand whether the elephant tail here can be used as the retrospective calendar for the physiological past. And interestingly, I found that yes, indeed, we can do it. So this is the tail here of the elephants. There are 5. I'm just presenting few. If you are more interested to know more, I request you to go through the paper. And I found that, there were certain peaks of cortisol which were actually correlating with the biological events that happened in that elephant life in the past. So that gives us insight that the tail hair of elephants can actually be one of the retrospective calendar to understand the physiological past in elephants. Now, again, I'll bring you back to the free-ranging elephants and cortisol. So as I said that I found some of the insight that how positively it was correlated with cortisol. And along with my research, there are other research from other research team. They found that, mass status, herd types, social structure, driving of operation, challenging life event like giving birth and road crossing, human disturbance index, and fecal steroid concentration could influence the cortisol concentration in free-ranging Asian elephants. So as I said earlier, and have been focusing on this, that these small bits of information gives us insight that there are some kind of physiological changes that happens with respect to anthropogenic factors, with respect to environmental factors. So now the open question to address by almost whoever is listening, all the researcher, is that whether these are short-term adjustment, whether these adjustments are short-term and are proximate, and how this, how could this influence the survival and the fitness of the animals or the elephant in our context. So if you see, now coming back to where I started, the conservation, and when I said that conservation, we need to understand elephants. Now I think we have little bits of hints from understanding the elephants based on the published documentation. In context of Asian elephants, we found that, one of the research, recent research from India, they found that elephants are forming some kind of striking behavior, that they are forming all male groups in the human dominated landscape. And similarly, elephants are modulating their calls when they are, when they are facing some kind of disturbances. They are increasing the low frequency call, which is also called as rumbles, and they're lowering the high frequency call, which is known as trumpets. So they are modulating their calls based on the disturbance. Based on my research, I found that more disturbance they face, the more cortisol they are generating. And another study showed that the elephants are preferring habitat which is away from the roads, human roads, and they are preferring habitats which is more, which has more natural vegetation cover than human habitations. And if you see, these are all the studies that are conducted on Asian elephants. And similar study, if you see in African elephants, they have shown that elephants show refuse behavior, they show streaking behavior or bunching behavior, along with rise in cortisol. So when they are in human dominated landscape. So what it does, it gives us a snapshot that human disturbances or human dominated landscape, elephants are actually changing their behavior. Or, I should not say that they may be changing their behavior, and they may be changing their physiology. So it is quite evident from this, these hints that we have. So in this context, as I said earlier, that we need to have a holistic understanding about elephants, that we need to not just understand the behavior, not just the cognitive ability, but also the physiology, because physiology gives us insight about what is happening to elephants within. So why holistic studies are important? So here I want to go back to the small animal rodent and give you the example that why holistic studies are important to understand about species and how that they will cope up with different kind of disturbances. So here, let us talk about the early life experience in rodent. There are published literatures. You can go through the review here I have mentioned. So in this review, they have mentioned that the animal like rodent, if they face the stresses like maternal care, they can change it will bring different kind of physiological and behavioral changes. For instance, those rodent who faced poor maternal care there was rapid changes in physiology. They showed lifelong emotional reactivity. There was hyper stress hormone reactivity, and also the earlier cognitive decline was seen. And in the end, they had a shorter lifespan. And I'm also interested to tell you this fact that most of these changes were epigenetically transmitted to their offspring. So it is quite interesting, right? Those individuals which had more strong maternal care had neophilic offsprings. So when I say neophilic offsprings are those which were more curious and exploratory in nature, that to the novel causes, novel situation and challenges. So they were more curious and exploratory to the novel situation. If they were projected with novel challenges, they were not stressed, or they did not show any hyperactivity of HPA axis. Whereas those individuals which were experiencing poor maternal care gave rise to or gave birth to neophobic offspring. So that means they were more, they were more scared of the novel situation. If there were some novel challenges that came to them, they were more scared of it, and there were hyperactivity of HPA axis, and they were less exploratory to such situation and had higher stress hormone or glucocorticoids. And also the neophobic females, which were fearing the novel situation, died earlier than those which were neophilic. So I'm presenting this information to you to make you understand that how physiological changes and behavioral changes based on the stressors or perturbation is transmitted over generation, influencing their survival, right? So now if you go back to Asian elephants, it is now important for whoever is working on endocrine aspect or physiology to understand that in case of slowly reproducing animal like elephants, the novel situation here may not just be maternal care, but the accelerated habitat loss, the anthropogenic perturbation, and how this novel situation would influence the physiology and behavior. Now we have small hints, we have a tiny bits of information that yes, they are indeed doing some kind of physiological and behavioral changes in elephants. We do not know whether these are just adaptive changes or it's actually bring about the major change in elephants. So, and how this, if they are the short-term adaptive changes, how it is influencing the fitness of the elephants, and ultimately the survival of the elephants is what we need to understand if we are really concerning about the conservation. So conservation is not just shouting about ivory, and not just talking about the elephant ride and all. It's also about understanding the elephants from this perspective through the lens of behavior and physiology. So now let us go back. I think this is my last slide, and come back to conservation. So as I said earlier, conservation for me, still, if you ask me what is conservation, it's a complex conundrum. And if you ask me to simplify conservation, I say this is my simplified version of conservation equation for elephants. So for the conservation of elephants, one need to understand elephants, and not just elephant. We need to understand the habitat they are in. We need to understand the climate they are facing, also how that climate is influencing the habitat. There are lots of interaction terms here, and also the human aspect of it, and ultimately the implementation of the strategy and how it is hampering the conservation of elephants. And as I said, understanding the elephants, I'm just summarizing the key point that it is important to understand the behavior of elephants. It is important to understand the physiological insight. For this, we can use cortisol. Cortisol is one of the hero. We can use another hero. Many other heroes are there, which we can use, and we can validate it to understand, to gain the physiological insights. It can be reproductive hormones, it can be stress hormone, it can be any metabolic hormones. And also it is important to understand the social dynamics, how it is changing over the period for the elephants. Other than that, if I talk about cortisol, cortisol also has role, can be also used as an index of conservation initiative. What I mean by this is, if imagine that we come up with better conservation strategy, now what we can do is we can assess the behavior and physiology of the elephants before the conservation strategy is implemented, and after the conservation strategy is implemented, and see how that is different. So it can act as a, the index for measuring the efficacy of conservation strategy. So with this, I want to say that we certainly do not want these 3 living species of elephants get extinct like the older Proboscideans that I was talking about. And even if it happens, God forbid it should not, but if in case it happens, certainly I don't want my next generation to read that we were the main cause behind the disappearing of these Proboscideans. With this, I'd like to end my talk and would like to open the floor for the questions. And also I want to dedicate my talk. I have decided that most of my talk for 2021, I'm going to dedicate this talk to Sir Sundarlal Bahuguna. Sir Sundarlal Bahuguna is the leader of the forest conservation movement, Chipko, in India. It's quite famous movement. And I was, as a master's student, I was very inspired by his initiatives. Sadly, we lost him due to COVID-19. And thus, I would like to dedicate this talk to him and end my talk here. And yeah, I'm ready to take the questions. Thank you.
Sanjita, thank you very much. I don't think we could have, if we'd asked, please come and tell us, give us laymen an overview of why endocrinology is important to elephant conservation. We couldn't have asked for a better explanation. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Even with my little bit of background in endocrinology, well, no, not in endocrinology, but hanging around with yourself and Janine and others for several years, I've learned a lot, and you put it so clearly why we need to look into these things, and also why you can't just take the stress samples and draw conclusions based on one particular behavior or one particular observation that you've been making. A very interesting point for me was, and I unfortunately not here, but I think in captive elephants was with the body condition index. I think Dr. Pakanat's work with captive elephants, interestingly, she found that it wasn't a linear graph, but it was a U-shaped graph, in that the fat of the elephant, so they had very, very high glucocorticoids with very low body condition. Then it improved, and then it went up again for very high, which she put down to not a lot of mental stimulation, which of course wild elephants can have.
Yeah, so if I have to give my insight on this, is I was also very curious. So if you see in context of humans, those humans who are very thin to very obese, of course there is some health related issues with them. So my next research step is to understand that how obesity, if that exists in elephant, hampers the health of the elephants. So till now, I do not have any insight and would not like to comment on it. But yes, it will be really interesting. And I'm really glad that the use of patterns exist for the elephants. It's really good insight.
Well, speaking as a camp who are working very hard to make sure some of our elephants lose some weight, I can tell you that I would be very interested in that research as well. Also fascinating, I know Veronica has switched her camera on, which probably means she has a question. But also very interesting that the finding that the elephants, presumably where there was very little human disturbance, the crop raiding actually reduced their stress. Could you let us know a little bit about the human elephant, if there was any human disturbance towards that crop raiding? You say high risk, high reward. How high is the risk where you were studying? And did you study anywhere where the risk was higher?
Yes. So when we compare the studies, when we see the cross studies comparison, if you see in African elephants, there was this insight that the elephants which were crop foraging were actually having higher stress level. So it entirely depends on the population and also the habitat these elephants are in. So the study that I did had lesser human disturbances as compared to the other study site. And moreover, I did not incorporate that factor in my equations. And now that is a reason that the further step for me was to understand how the gradient of human disturbance would influence the stress response. And the study that the result that I presented, which is on unpublished finding, is on the elephants which are actually crop foraging, and they have an extreme index, an extreme gradient. They have a low human disturbance versus high human disturbances. So I think that finding will give us more insight about how crop foraging along with human disturbance would influence the stress response. And as I said earlier, that there are multiple factors that would influence the stress response. It is not easy to pinpoint that this is the reason that they are. So if you read my paper, I have in that paper title itself, I have said probable reason, because it's a probable reason. I'm not saying confidently that it is the reason that it has reduced. But as I said, the crop foraging is high risk, high gain strategy. We should be open-minded, not to just focus on high risk part, also to focus on high gain strategy. That was what I just wanted to highlight.
Perfect, yeah. Thank you. Veronica, did you have a question? She's jumped. Okay, unmute yourself and please ask.
Hello, yeah. Hi, I'm Veronica. I'm studying Asian elephant communication, but I'm really interested in endocrinology too. And well, thank you first for the very interesting and important talk. I was wondering if you were looking also at individual differences in stress responses, because I know that a lot of people from the Cognition for Conservation Lab that had also given talks here before, they were looking at how personality plays a role in what in which elephants are more likely to do crop wading, and then you would think maybe the ones that are less stressed. So I was wondering, well, if you could see any individual differences in that.
I really appreciate your question, Veronica. And if you remember in my presentation, as I said, there are multiple factors. And when I showed the levels of stress response, one of the factors I included was individual level. So when I say individual level, there is idiosyncrasies when we compare. There is individual level variation. Of course, I don't deny that. And the only thing is, in the landscape like India, it is little hard to follow elephants over a period of time. And if you won't believe that, that was one of my major objectives during my PhD. I was highly ambitious. I wanted to know that what happens to the particular individual when it is going for the crop raiding versus when it comes back after crop raiding, those which are like, opportunistic crop raiders. But now then, since I'm planning that there are certain, there are ways of doing it. There are radio tags, radio collar, and all these things. So yes, I don't deny that, individual variation would play a role. And it is very, very important facet that wants to take care of that, personality trait. When we talk about personality trait, imagine that you and I, we face some kind of challenge. And imagine you are more experienced about that challenge than you'll be less stressed than me, because I have never seen that. And imagine that I'm little shy in nature, then I'll be like little shying away with that. And so the reaction will be entirely dependent on how we will be, how our personalities are. And yes, I think, yes, it will be really important to see that. Regarding the second aspect that you said, that crop foraging elephants, can you repeat that? You said that crop raiding elephants, you said some.
Well, yeah, the idea is that maybe it's the personality that these elephants are already more courageous and less neophobic, and that like braver elephants would be more likely to do crop raiding than, let's say, shy ones or the ones that are easily scared.
Yes, that's again, yeah, that could be quite possible. You never know. But in my context, most of these elephants were habitual crop raiders. They were the resident area elephants which were in the human-dominated landscape. But this kind of study can actually be conducted in the fringes of forest, where there are opportunistic males coming out from the forest, sneaking out and then raiding the crops. It could be, now again, it could be because they are stressed within, they are not getting good quality of diet inside and hence they are coming out. Or it could be that the good quality of diet might be enticing them, even though there is good resources inside. So if you see, this is entirely different dynamics here. Inside the forest, you have to walk a lot, you have to search for the good palatable diets, whereas outside the forest, in the agricultural area, it's uniform distribution of lots of resources, right? So many animal may get enticed to such kind of landscape versus when we are talking about sparsely distributed resource. Again, this should be studied. It will be interesting study to look at. But really a good question you brought forward, Veronica. I really appreciate it.
Any more questions, Paolo, Sophie? Would you like to ask something? Other people in the Zoom, or are there any questions on Facebook, Nisa?
I have no question on Facebook for now, so I'm gonna still give them a few more minutes. If there is any question, we'll be typing in. So if anybody on Zoom have questions, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay. Sophie's saying very clear presentation, with which I totally agree. So I'm going to ask you, not a personal question, I suppose, but how long did it take you to, you were going to tell us a story about this anyway. So how long did it take you to get proficient at remembering whose dung pile was which until the elephants walked away? That seems like a skill that must have taken a long time to develop. And how did you know? Like, you were always working with rangers and people who knew the elephants as well, I guess. So how did you know it was safe? But how long did it take you to get proficient at that? And how did you do it?
This is really interesting. So in many cases, when I was working in protected areas, what I used to do is I used to follow elephants on foot, and also wherever it is permitted. So that we have lots of restriction in India. So we used to take vehicle inside the forest and we used to observe the elephants. Many times we used to hide behind the bush. And I must thank, my trackers. These are all the tribal people from the forest area, and they have immense knowledge about elephants, that where elephants are, where they have gone. So I used to follow their instinct and see the elephants there. And we used to hide behind the bush many times and see the elephant defecating. So I was certain that which individual defecated. But in case of crop raiding, the situation was quite different because crop foraging happened during the nighttime. And what I did was in the Hassan area of Karnataka state, I circulated my phone number to everyone. So they used to call me that, okay, we have elephants at our backyard, please come. We have elephants in our paddy field, please come. So when we used to go, it used to be that elephant would have gone back, or there are elephants, but it is too dark to see them, whether it's a female, male, which individual. So for that, we use molecular sexing to do the sex type. And also, so what we did was for the ACE class, we measured this dung circumference to know whether it's adult, subadult, juvenile. So in many cases, we knew which individual defecated because most of the resident males were known to us. And in many cases, we were unknown to them. So in crop foraging area, it was entirely different. In protected areas, it was direct sighting of the elephants. So that's how I identify which individual. And I gave, Joan, I also gave the name to most of the elephants, which I used to cite repeatedly, Vinayaka, Ganesha, and all these things. So it so happened that, my tracker used to say, oh, Madam C, Ganesha is coming. So we were so used to with those elephants. So these were permanent resident elephants of those areas. That's how I identified.
And that sort of familiarity with wild elephants, I'm extremely jealous of. Yeah. I do see a question come. Oh, Nisa, there we go. You got something?
Yep. I saw something from Facebook. So from Mr. Ram, Mandayam, he asked whether, have you seen if elephants have less cortisol levels during harvesting season? During harvesting season.
Harvesting season, less cortisol. So when we say harvesting season is when the crop raiding or crop foraging happens. And that is when I saw, as I said, that there were less stress response. Now I won't call stress, cortisol level in the elephants. And but I did not categorize my data in terms of harvesting season versus non-harvesting season. So I won't can clearly say that it was, but during crop foraging period, yes, they had the lesser cortisol level, unlike the other period.
Yeah, and I think that was the only questions that I have from the Facebook. Everybody's
Patricia has some questions.
everybody's been saying, oh, there's another one just popped up. During mating season, does cortisol level increase?
Oh, well, so now when we say mating season, we need to understand the sex-wise differences. Female and male will have different way of reacting to situations. So based on my study, I did not study the pregnancy on the wild elephants. It's really hard to do that. And what I did was I did the lactating, because based on the suckling calf, presence of suckling calf, the enlargement of mammary gland. So that's how I gave the coding, whether elephants were lactating or not. And so only with the lactating, I can say, yes, it shows that the lactogenesis process and also the extrinsic stresses induces the stress cortisol level in the animal. But insight from other study, like one of the study from our research team, they did must versus non-must, and they found that the must, that is sexually active period in male elephants, do not have change. They did not find any change in stress or cortisol level. So now, so most of the time people think that the musk elephants are highly aggressive. They are more stressed. But one needs to understand the context. These musk elephants, if they are in captivity, and if the captivity people are insensitive to understand such biological needs, in such situation, elephants are actually stressed. And there you can see different kind of stereotypic behavior. So the elephants in the wild, they are free. They rummage around for the females, and thus they have lesser stress, or they have no change in stress level. But of course, there is high rise in testosterone. So that's what I can say based on what I know, Nisha. Thank you.
Well, that does make sense, because if it's in the wild and the males are in musk, then it's basically a natural behaviors for the elephant themselves. So I don't think we'll see a fluctuation of the fecal glucocorticoid, because it's part of their natural behavior. It does not really cause them stress. But then if there are, the captive elephants, then they're actually restricted to, in some ways, to really show their natural behavior. So
Exactly.
they will actually have an increase of the glucocorticoid, definitely. Another question just popped up from Rajesh. Is crop raiding because of lack of resources within the forest, or is it because of easy availability?
Well, that is not the hypothesis I have tested so far, but in my context, if I have to give insight based on my findings, these elephants were the resident elephant of that fragmented patches of forest. So for them, crop raiding was the, usual behavior. They were habitual crop foraging elephants. And yes, there might be cases where, there may be little resources inside the forest, particularly during dry season, and they may come out if there is in the vicinity or in the fringes of forest. If there are lots of crops or agricultural crop, they may get enticed. So again, this is the hypothesis. As I said, that it is very tough to answer like yes, no, and because it entirely depends on context and also depends on habitat.
Yes, I was going to say both as well. Exactly. Depends on where they are. Veronica, you have another question.
Yeah, thank you. You were already bringing this up, John and Nissa, and you two. What do you think? Were you able to compare your findings to earlier findings in the captive setting, or do you think it's for the reasons that you already talked about, that sometimes you can't even compare the results? I would be very interested in that.
Yeah. So now talking about the captive scenario, and since I was working on free ranging, so this is entirely two different scenario. So in captive scenario, there will be different kind of stresses. There will be different kind of challenges. So when I'm saying challenges, different kind of stressors or stimulus. And in free ranging condition, it will be entirely different, because we have ecological situation, season, and they are foraging on their own, they are behaving naturally, and then they're also facing anthropogenic disturbances. In captive scenario, it can be different depending on different captive facility, right? So I can't compare the study between captive and free ranging. And also moreover, most of the captive studies that has been conducted so far, many of them use different indices. They use different techniques, ELISA technique to compare. So all we can say is the stresses. Imagine reproductive stress. Imagine the elephant is pregnant or elephant is lactating in the captive scenario and elephant is lactating in the wild scenario. So now we can say that whether the lactating female showed higher level of glucocorticoid in captive scenario or not, and whether they showed higher level in the wild. So that kind of comparison can be done, but yeah, direct comparison cannot be done, and also cannot be done with African elephants because it's entirely different species with different habitat. So there are lots of, I told you that when I started the stress response study, I was like, oh, I'm studying stress response in elephants. It's so easy. But now when I'm gaining this insight, I'm finding it that there are multiple facets we need to think about. And also while articulating the answer to the questions, there are multiple things we need to consider. We can't simply say yes or no, yes, we did, and yes, there is no. So it's always a probable findings. And right now, if you remember, Veronica, in my presentation, I showed the drop in the ocean. So it's an understanding that I have, it's just a drop in the ocean. We have to understand more about elephant physiology. Thanks for the question, whoever posted it.
So I have another one from Rajesh. Yes. Have you done any detailed study on infrasound communication of Asian elephant, especially in Karnataka?
No, I have not done, and I think I won't be able to answer it. But yes, there is one of the team member, Dr. Nachiketa Sharma. He's working on elephant communication in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. So whoever asked this question, I request him to talk to or contact Dr. Nachiketa Sharma from Indian Institute of Science. But yes, I have not done the study, so I'm very lay person. I think I will have most of questions with Veronica and Nachiketa than when they present. So I'm sorry that I won't be able to answer that.
And Veronica will be presenting in a couple of weeks' time, but possibly, definitely not about Karnataka. Maybe you may mention it, but your study wasn't done there, and I don't think so much on infrasonic. But anyway, she will be presenting.
Yes.
I did see another question on Facebook on the comments. And it was from Annabelle, our old friend from Laos, and she asked, hold on a second. What was the maximum time you would wait between defecation and sample collection?
Wonderful question. I wanted someone to ask this question.
Annabelle's always good like that.
I want to thank Annabelle and I want to say hi to her. So Annabelle, there was a period that, so I have many humorous story behind it. So many times what happened is I used to work in the forested area and there used to be traffic of elephants. So if one elephant defecates and they move away, there will be other elephant that will be venturing in. So many times I had to neglect those sample. But what I did was during my PhD, I did not present that data. I also validated some of the field protocol and also the lab protocol. So there are multiple factors like effect of collection of time matters a lot. And I think there was one of the paper by my friend, Ifin Yong, she presented, she has documented it that the fecal glucocorticoid metabolite remains intact, almost stable for 6 to 9 hours. After that, it fluctuates. And that was what I also found in my experiment. And also I did, whether to collect from the center of the bolus or to mix the dung sample. So to come back to Annabelle's question that yes, many times in one context, 6 hours, that was a very funny incident. I saw a tusker. So to get a male elephant sample was really hard because it was really hard to sight them. And I saw that one elephant was about to defecate. They used to raise the tail and I asked my team, they just wait, that elephant may be defecating. So we waited. And every time we want to leave, it used to raise the tail. And finally it defecated. But what happened was it was constipated so that the defecation was hanging from his anal aperture. It did not fall to the ground. So it was almost 6 hours that I waited for that elephant. And another incident happened was, I was waiting for a female and that female was about to defecate and she defecated right inside the water. So it was just floating on the water and I could not collect. So it was, maximum hours or 3 hours that I waited in the wild. But in crop foraging area, it was entirely different. That this dung sample ranged between 3 hours to sometime to 6 hours, and also sometime to 9 hours. So those which were showed different kind of levels, cortisol level, I used to discard them from the analysis. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Annabelle, I know you're still listening. We have to get you back on to tell us whether you're actually collecting from your released elephants now, or whether you're collecting from inside your enclosure. What was that question about? Presumably your released elephants, which she will have to talk about. Nisa, you have anything else?
Nisa is not there.
Okay, I think it's gone quiet. Okay. All that remains in that case, Sanjita, is for me to say thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who's asked the questions as well. As I said, after I don't think we could have had a clearer demonstration of why endocrinology will help with conservation and what it and how it fits in there, and some of the mistakes you can make, or how you cannot be too facile about joining the links between what you have seen and what you observe in the lab afterwards. There's so many different things going on, but how endocrinology can move forward to help us better understand and better preserve elephants in the wild, and as it happens, different in captivity, but also, as you know, we're great believers in using this technique to help us better find ways to look after elephants in captivity while they're still around. So that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, particularly Sanjita. We will see you. Oh, next week we're off to Kenya for a wild elephant safari. We're going to go to one of my favorite bits of Kenya, which is Loisabe up in Laikipia, and going to do it'll be presumably less scientific, but more elephant. No bunte, unfortunately, but more elephants moving around. So keeping things mixed up. Once again, thank you very much, and we will see you all later.